Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pause for Pedagogy, a conversation with Dan Jenkins and Chuck Palus. My name is Lisa Endersby, and I'm an educational developer with the Teaching Commons at York University and co-editor of Pause for Pedagogy. The ILA and I are thrilled to welcome Dan and Chuck to our latest conversation in the Pause for Pedagogy series. So welcome to you both. I would love it if you begin by sharing a little bit about yourselves.
Chuck, take it away.
Thanks, Lisa. Hello, Dan, and glad to be here. I work for the Center for Creative Leadership. I'm a senior scientist there in leadership development, and along the course of my career, I've had the pleasure of helping to develop tools to do the work in the classroom and then in the field. So we're here today to share one of those tools, Visual Explorer, and for my part in this, I'm going to talk a little bit about where all this came from and the background of some of this.
Super. Hi, and I'm Dan Jenkins. I'm Chair and Associate Professor of Leadership and Organizational Studies at the University of Southern Maine, and also share the responsibility of co-editing the Pause for Pedagogy series with Lisa. And yeah, I'll be sharing a little bit about how Chuck and I got to working on this together, as well as the influence that the ILA had on that partnership.
Awesome. Thank you both. And Dan, you led me right into my next question, which we were talking about before we started recording. How do you and Chuck know each other?
Right. So through a mutual contact, actually, who I had opportunity to meet and get to know better, Barbara Crosby, who we interviewed for this series, gosh, maybe a year and a half ago. And she had just come out with a new book, and one of the folks she had interviewed and part of her qualitative research was Chuck Palus and his work with the Center for Creative Leadership. And through some, mostly through her, but also some other mentors, as I was soul searching for what to do on my sabbatical, they said, well, have you thought about any work with the Center for Creative Leadership? I said, yeah, I go to their workshops every time they're at an ILA global conference, and I've actually started to integrate some of their tools into my courses at USM. And so I was encouraged to reach out to Chuck and did, and luckily he didn't ignore my email, and we were able to. I stalked him basically at a session he was doing in Brussels, and we connected, and very, I guess, stereotypically, we had a Belgian waffle and some coffee and some other things, and had a great conversation that what could have been a 20-minute chat led to probably about 90 minutes or more, and we agreed to follow up and just found so much common ground with respect to the tools that he had helped to create and architect in his work at the Center for Creative Leadership, and how I was using them in leadership education contexts, in both in face-to-face and technology-enhanced modes.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks to ILA.
The same way, or do you remember that differently?
Yeah, that's pretty good. I did ignore a couple of your emails, I think, but you persisted. No, it was friendship at first sight, and I'm glad it happened. And now we're actually pursuing that in terms of this article. So that's feels like a great build to start doing the work together, and then start having work in common that we can write about. So that's pretty exciting for me.
That's awesome. A classic academic, well, love story, I suppose, friendship story, made for TV movie in the works, it sounds like. That's awesome. Well, thank you both for being here. And Chuck, thank you. You're both so good at this, leading me into my first question. So about your article in general. So what key question or questions were you hoping to answer in writing this article?
Yeah, sure. So, kind of piggybacking on what kind of brought us together, this idea of, how do we use some of these tools that have been so productive and so intentional in what has, historically been training and development, and I guess perhaps some consulting spaces and program design, but the key audience or participants, from my understanding, working with the center and actually spending a couple weeks there over the course of this semester as part of my sabbatical, tend to be professionals, working both in for-profit and non-for-profit settings. But they've and the center has been working with primarily those populations since the 70s, but more recently there has been some folks that have their feet in both spaces with respect to higher education and everything outside of higher education. And so one of the key questions that I had, because of the research that I have done and studying leadership educators and what they do in the classrooms as well as in the online spaces, and noticing that discussion-based pedagogies tend to be the most frequently used instructional strategies that are used, hands down. And it doesn't matter if it's face-to-face or online or blended or graduate or undergraduate. It's discussion, whether it's just a full discussion or kind of a combination of lecture and discussion or small group discussion. We just do that a lot because that's the way that we learn. We learn by telling stories. We learn from others' experiences. And many will argue, and I would agree, that leadership is this socially constructed phenomenon. And we get to that by making meaning from our own experiences and discussing that with our peers. And I found that the tools, and particularly the Visual Explorer, which I know Chuck will give some background on, helps to enhance that experience of having dialogue with one another, and this idea of co-inquiry and coming to new understandings about experiences and critically reflecting through dialogue. And so when you basically, I want to look for how do we enhance this experience of discussion in the classroom or online, and are there some tools to do that? Are there ways that facilitators of this dialogue, or the leadership educators in this case, can enhance and become better facilitators of that experience for students of leadership?
I've been thinking for myself too, just this idea of online discussion. Many of our faculty here are curious about that exact same question, about how to make that a little bit more dynamic, to think about relating that to learning outcomes in a more meaningful way. So I'll spare you all of my questions about that, because that would just be my own work in educational development. But I think you're onto something, and I think our readers will be knowing that you're onto something too. So you've mentioned already this tool, this Visual Explorer tool. And so tell me more about this tool that you discussed in the article. What lessons have you learned about teaching leadership online from your experience using this tool?
Yeah, I can take up a little bit of the background of the tool. Dan, I was really fascinated by your depiction of where you're at in this work, and it really resonates, I think, with a long-term journey at the Center for Creative Leadership. So let me frame it as a polarity, actually, that CCL has wrestled with. That in our earliest days, there was a lot of just stand-up, what we call sometimes platform training, right? There's a sage on the stage, there's a person in front of the room that knows everything, right? Is the expert and leads people through a learning experience. And that's important and good and powerful. And also part of that has always been dialogue, kind of a sense-making, more free-flowing discussion. You know, there's not a privileged person in front. It's more of a circle that you sit in and learn from each other. And, you know, sometimes those even conflict and get in the way of each other. But we've really been fascinated by this second